my girl and I go out and join the park parade. Arm in arm we stroll along.
Okay, so welcome to the fourth episode of Battlefront's podcast called Collecting War. Today we are here with another collector, Battlefront member, and much more, Mr. Jean Karl Soler. It's a thank you for accepting our invite.
It's my pleasure, absolutely.
And thank you for hosting us here as well within your collection itself. So to start off, I wanted to ask you where it all started.
That's a very good question. I mean, I remember when I was a child, my father had suffered a lot during the war because my grandfather was interned. My grandfather, who I never met, Jean Soler, was very, very, very good with his hands, and he was involved even with electronics. He used to work as a draftsman at the dry docks at the military, obviously the naval dockyard, and had a very high-end senior position. And he was very good with his hands and very good in electronics. He actually built an actual functional radio, and he used to fix things for other people, including radios, receiving radios. So he was reported when the war started. He was reported by somebody, a clerk somewhere, as being a German spy. His surname Soler was Catalan, Spanish, from Catalonia. His wife's maiden surname was German, and he was considered to be, on that basis, there was this sort of link to obviously, the Axis side of the conflict. So he was suspected of being a German spy. He was reported as being a German spy. Police raided his home. They found parts of these radios which were being fixed, or he actually built his own receiving radio. And he was basically accused of being a spy and interned. So the family suffered enormously. They suffered hunger during the war. From being practically a rich family with a senior, member of the naval dockyard with a very good pay. They used to go to church in a horse-drawn carriage, my father remembers. So suddenly becoming practically poor and having problems supplying food, getting food during the war. So his elder sister, lied about her age and actually got into the victory kitchen to get food for the family. So the war was there were all these stories of the war, of my grandfather being interned and my father, these adventures during the war, including when they went to Gozo to stay with the family because they lived in Slima, which was bombed. A house 4 doors up was completely destroyed by a miss, an incorrect bomb which went awry and hit a house up their street. Stories about them going down into the shelters in Slima. So eventually what happened was they went to Gozo sort of to get away from the conflict, and all these stories of my father in the war. He saw the attack on the Illustrious with his own eyes. My grandfather was interned in St. Augustine convent for some reason, because my grandfather was not sent to Uganda because he suffered in Rabat, like a stroke, because he took it so badly. And my father remembers on Sa'aya Hill with his brother, my uncle, looking at the attacks on the Illustrious from afar. He saw it with his own eyes. He was, I think, 13 or 14, whatever. And after the war, he then went to teaching. His schooling was interrupted during the war, so it was a big thing. So when I was young, I had a plastic Luger and I had a plastic called Dragoon, and you had these. No, it was actually metal. The Luger I think was plastic, and if I remember correctly, and the called Dragoon, which unfortunately I still don't have anymore. Instead of the percussion caps, you put these small explosive charges, and it actually shot. You pulled the trigger, bang, bang, bang.
So it was something kids had, or it was special?
It was something kids had. It was quite common. I was born in '66, so I was in the '70s. I was young in the '70s. I remember with my father we used to go out on the weekend, and I remember going to the airport, and you'd see the Royal Air Force aircraft being prepared for the action during, I believe it was the Suez Crisis. I remember going to the airport, and it was a big thing with these RAF aircraft. So the approach and of course all the ships coming in to harbour at the time, we still had not shut down the British base, so there was still a British base. So it was the military or the war or the war related. And my mother was also very active in collecting china. She was interested in antiques. She was quite well known in the community of antiques, going to auctions and buying things and selling things. So the house was full of antique furniture, for example. The house we had originally in St. Julian's, and then we moved to Slema, and then they moved to Ibrach, and I still have some of those furniture and old lamps, antique lamps, quite nice ones. So, preserving things from the past and a link to the military or to the history of the war, I was very strong in my childhood, and I was always a collector. I collected stamps, and now I have a collection of all the stamps, multi-stamps from independence onwards. I get the first day covers every month, and I started in collecting firearms and militaria principally after I finished my studies. I finished my PhD in 2011. And I promised myself I would do one of two things, something completely not related to medicine. One of them could be, I was thinking, you don't laugh, either getting a bass guitar, which is another, but I have a musical ear, but I'm not good with my hands. So I decided instead to go into military.
Was it a good choice in retrospect?
Yes, because ever since we had the house in Attard, I never wanted firearms, and there were two things I didn't want. One was a swimming pool, because I was very afraid with the young kids there might be an accident. So we didn't have a swimming pool. We had just enough space for one, but we didn't. And the other thing was not any firearms or anything which was dangerous. So I had some bayonets and swords. I still have them. They're still on display upstairs. But nothing which would be dangerous. So, bayonets and swords are usually not sharp. It's a legend that they eventually blunt, and if you don't keep sharpening them, they are not that dangerous. So I had a display of bayonets and swords which were wall mounted, taking great care not. So I used cork to cut them off from the wall so they don't rust, and then I take care of them. In the beginning, when I first got them, I didn't know how to preserve them, but then I learned. My uncle was also a very avid collector. Vince Bugeya was a prominent member of Amax, and he had a huge collection at home, and practically all of his collection was on the walls of his house. And as a child, I remember I used to go to Vince's house as a young man, and and then I even went with the kids. He was interested in aquaria, which I also was. I don't have the time anymore, but that was also another thing I used to do. And and all of these firearms. And in fact, I have a Lanchester, which was his. And when he passed away, his family auctioned his firearms, and they eventually, roundabout way, got his Lanchester, which is in my collection. But I remember that Lanchester as a child, admiring this rare, very rare, it still is rare today, submachine gun. And I remember my kids, taking a picture of my kids at Vince's house, with my daughter and my son, each with a firearm. And my son had the Lanchester in his. And my son is also a member of Battlefront, and he's also interested in collecting and militaria.
So we've gotten quite a lot of the story, but let's go back. You said you had a plastic Luger, am I correct?
I'm not sure if it was plastic or like some kind of metal, yeah.
Would you consider that the first thing you ever collected?
Yeah, I wish I still had it. I don't know where it is. When we moved house, some of the things, I got like a box of toys, and at some point it was cleared out without my consent, and I was very angry about that. I don't like throwing things away. I'm not a hoarder, but my wife might disagree. But I only throw something away when it's damaged. Excuse me, beyond repair. So I don't know where this Luger ended up, but yes, absolutely, that would have been something. And it was always distressful for me when something broke. So again, with the collection, I take great care. In fact, most of them are in storage. They're treated, it should be more regular, but at least once a year they get oil for the firearms, and they're stored in a dry environment. The environment is controlled humidity. But I'm always afraid of breaking something, so I don't shoot the firearms, for example. They are there for the collection.
I think something that really distinguishes you from other collectors, I obviously being in Battlefront and other circles, military collectors, we've met a lot of people. I think what's unique about your collection is the length you go to preserve things, like you just mentioned. A lot of collectors will find the balance between showcasing and preserving, right? So, because you have to take them out. But you seem to put a lot of importance on the preservation aspect. Can you explain why?
It is the primary purpose, I think, of collecting. I mean, in my opinion, the primary purpose of collecting is to preserve for future generations. One of the let me give an example. One of the most dramatic moments in my life, one of the most harrowing. I've been around the world as part of. I'm a researcher and I'm part of a research group, and twice a year we meet for research in various countries in Europe. So I've been in many European countries. And when I was in Poland, I went to Auschwitz. And it's preserved, the gas chambers are preserved as they were found by the Allies at the moment of discovery. So nothing was touched. And it's a harrowing experience. It is soul-wrenching. You cannot describe it in words. I still can't talk about it. I took a lot of photographs. It's another thing I also do, photography, something we share. Però the idea that you keep things intact, you keep things as original, so that you don't distort the history. So nothing in my collection is retouched. I'm not the type that would fix scratches or change. Even if I buy a firearm which has incorrect grips, I will remove those grips because they're incorrect. I will find a replacement which is historically accurate. So it has to be from the same period according for that particular variant and according for that time, made by the factory that was making or from the supplier that was supplying for the factory manufacturing that firearm. And I would put on the new grips, but I would keep the, in inverted commas, fake grips. So whatever happened, I always keep track and it's always together. So it's always as it is. I have a firearm, a Nambu with a broken firing pin. I got the replacement, which was not easy. To get a firing pin for a Nambu is extremely difficult. But it still has its original firing pin. But with it, I also have stored the replacement. So keeping historically genuine. I don't modify. So I take care to oil the firearms. I take care to at least once when I first get them, take them apart as much as is safe without doing any damage, obviously, cleaning internally, oiling them to a point where all of the internal parts are covered with oil, and then storing them and then oiling them again at least every 12 months and keeping them in a dry environment so that they are preserved. When it comes to the holsters, every 3 years or so, I give them a full leather treatment. I actually get them from abroad, so actually use a specific museum quality oil or fat to actually restore the leather and keep it supple and keep it fungus free and protect it against excessive humidity. With the paperwork, the manuals, everything is in archival storage. So you have actually special plastic folders that are acid free. So they are more expensive and they are stored in such archival plastic pockets in a folder, which is then put in a cardboard box which a buffer contains. So it's acid, any hydrogen sulfide, which actually eventually attacks the ink, is neutralized by the box, the cardboard box in which the plastic folders are stored. Everything is categorized. So everything I have in the collection, I have a list. So in here, where I have the collection, there are little booklets or bits of paper with in a particular area or in a particular box, whatever are the contents. So if I'm looking for something, if I open the box, I just look at the list and I know it's inside that particular box. Excuse me. But then I have on the computer, I have a list of all of the items with all of the markings. So I actually write, categorize this under the book section. I will have the book with the printer, the country, the period, and then the title of the book and where it is stored, whether it's in the collection, whether it's in the library upstairs, whether it's in my office. So very little is exhibited. But what I do is we're allowed to exhibit firearms which are pre-1900. So in my office I have a couple of firearms which are Pre-1900, I have a deactivated Mosin Nagant sniper on display. I have 2 helmets. I actually also managed to get the helmet of a Tornado and the helmet of an Apache helicopter up in my office. I have some decoy ammunition up in my office and some cutout firearms, because I also collect police or factory cutouts. They are actually originally factory-made cutouts of firearms. So it's a firearm which usually one of the apprentices would be given the job to actually cut through, so you can see the mechanism work, but the firearm is practically functional. You can't shoot it because the barrel is also opened up, but it's fully functional. They're usually used as police demonstrators for police armourers, or as a selling point for people who are selling the firearms. Agents, they would use that to show how it works. I have those in my office. So those are on display and I can enjoy them. However, most of the stuff I have is under special storage, so hopefully it is not harmed in any way if it's in my collection for 50, 60, 70, 80 years. Depending on how long I'm going to live.
Yeah, and yes, that's a good point as well. I'm going to ask you about what the future of your collection is after but that will come later. But for now, I really want to get at, why do you feel responsible to preserve these artifacts? As you said, obviously the object for you is much more. It's a whole memory for you. It's the whole history. But why do you feel particularly responsible for it? Other people might not. They might say it's not my responsibility to care for this. But you seem to have a sense of duty towards preserving things as they were back then during the war.
I think everyone should. I think memories are important. I mean, I wear the ring that my wife put on my finger the day we got married. And it has a lot of value to me and to my family. So the preserving things, because things are symbols, and symbols are more than the object itself, but it is obviously the memory that symbol relates to. A photograph, it's just pixels these days. I mean, I have a lot of original slides that I took myself, film slides, including honeymoon, including family things, but also places I've been. And those generate memories, and those photographs give you a memory. But the actual artifacts in the collection, the items in the collection, actually went through the war, went through the Second World War. So they are a symbol, but they're also an object that went through that history, that lived in inverted commas that history. Yes, if they are destroyed, they cannot be replaced. You can copy a photograph. But the photograph is an image, and it's a memory, and the image is more important than the cellulose it's stored on. So if you copy it, if you digitize a photo, you've retained most of it. But if you destroy a cannon, or if you destroy a mortar, or if you destroy an airplane, it can be rebuilt, but it's not the same. It is a symbol of, but it is not the actual thing that went through the actual war. And again, I think, in my opinion, somebody has to do it. I mean, God forbid that the idea of collecting would lose favor. It's difficult because it takes time, it takes money, and it takes a lot of knowledge and reading and research. But the people who collect are the people who are, I think, worldwide, even more important than museums in retaining the history. Because museums have usually limited space and limited budget. And collectors are in some ways even more important in retaining the things going back centuries, even sometimes millennia, like people who collect fossils. That basically are keeping them for future generations, and also understanding more about what happened. We know more about the war now than we did immediately after the war. There were the people who actually experienced the war, but we're discovering all the time new things, new, for example, wrecks. For example, aircraft from the war suddenly discovered somewhere in a forest, or a tank found somewhere in someone's garage. We're always learning more about the war, having more history itself. The study of history itself without the artifacts would be practically impossible. So it's about preserving history, preserving tradition, preserving memory, remembering what a tragedy the war is, because if we forget history, we will relive it, and we will suffer it again, we'll make the same mistakes. And collecting is part of keeping history alive. And reenactment is even more, bringing it to life again for the enjoyment even of the general public.
You mentioned that, for example, an object, obviously, I'm going to use your words, lived through the war. A lot of collectors feel that, obviously, first of all, their collection, the space where it's in, is a sort of a sacred place, or a derivation of that meaning, because these are not only objects, they are things that have a certain aura or certain when you pick up something from the war, not only does it feel different, but it also makes you feel different because you're picking something that went through the war. So maybe can you explain how you feel when you pick up something like a shell or a binocular or something from the war, and how it feels different than as if picking up something from today, like a normal, like a pencil or something else?
I mean, let's give some examples. And first of all, I think the most exciting point, when you're really a collector, there are a number of there's like a process in getting an object. So, for example, you will want to have something that fits in a particular. So, starting off, it's less. This is less. Somebody starting off will find this less easy to relate to. But because when you start, you might be interested in the Second World War, and anything you find on the Monte which is related to the Second World War, you might buy it and you might get a lot of pleasure from that. That's great. But if you're a collector, you might come to a point where you say, for example, you have a collection of, I don't know, Sauer and Sons, and you have practically all the models except one, and you're looking for that one. I mean, one of the latest firearms I bought is a Walther Model 6. Only 1,000 were made. And most of them were lost because it didn't work. It was a 9mm blowback pistol, which was intended to be a firearm for the German army in the First World War, and it was a failure. It worked, but it was too expensive. It was not blowback is difficult to implement with 9mm. It's too powerful. So it was not as much a success as it was expected to be, and only 1,000 were made, and most of them were lost over time. So very few remain, and I managed to buy one recently at an auction. So that fits, you like complete a collection of Walthers. So that is one thing. But there's like a process. One, you desire a particular object, or you see something on a website or in an auction which you think would fit in the collection, you want to buy it. You then have to try and buy it because it's sometimes a competitive process. So you may or may not buy that firearm or that object. But if you manage to succeed, that is one point where you say, hi, I managed to. Then eventually it has to be transported, and with firearms it's complicated. It may take months, it may take a year. So right next to us at the moment there's a pallet which has come from Poland, which are a number of items which I've been basically buying over a period of a year. And then eventually they're put together in a pallet and transported to Malta. So one part is buying it. Secondly is then eventually getting it transported to Malta. And then you actually open the box, or you actually go to the agent, and you actually get the firearm in your hands for the first time, see it for the first time. And then you eventually have to do the paperwork, and it's transferred, and you go and you get it. And then you put it in, usually the day I get it, I don't have time. So I just put it in one of the safes, and then eventually I will find time, sit down, take it apart, clean it, take notes that goes into the database of the object, so I have all the markings that are written down, clean it, and then put it in its place. And then I see it once every year or so when I go to clean out, give it oil. You actually, when you see it the first time, there's obviously the visual impact, and also holding it in your hands the first time. And then over time, you're going to be studying it, and you're going to be appreciating it every so often when you go to the collection. And you think, who knows what it went through. So, for example, in the collection I have, I don't know, an officer's Luger or a police pistol. All right, you're going to think what might have gone through, what part of history it played. Manuals also have their own appeal. You open up a manual and you leafing through it, and you see cutouts or diagrams of the firearm you may own, or tactics which were employed at the time, and you always learn something new. So, but the actual fact that you have put something together, like a collection where you have, for example, I don't know, I have a Garand, you manage to find the sling for it, and you manage to find the bayonet for it, and you manage to find the cleaning kit, the accessories, and it's all there, not all together, but it's all there in the collection. You also have the satisfaction of the completion. And it's a lot of work, and sometimes it becomes a burden, and sometimes you think you want to reduce the burden, but the satisfaction of having successfully put together so many special things, because many of the things are really special, is something which warms your heart. And when maybe you have a bad day and you think about some of the things you have, or maybe you come down to and have a look at a few things, or sometimes you install a new shelf and you put things in place and you rediscover things, because you can't remember everything you have. You in a way rediscover something you hadn't touched for 3 or 4 years. Each time it gives you pleasure and satisfaction, and you also know you're doing something socially useful.
And maybe even this feeling comes to you when you are interacting with other collectors and you explain what you have and what they have. So
Yes.
What is the role of the community in collecting?
I wish it was stronger. I mean, I think one of the good things of being in a club is that you go to the club once a week, twice a month, once a quarter, whatever, depending on the time, and you meet up with other people, you learn if there's any news. Somebody would have bought something new, he might bring it to the club if it's not a farm, because with a farm you need a special permit, and discuss. But unfortunately, we don't have organized collector meetings, and I think this is something where the club is falling short. So Battlefront are far more active in this, and which is why I was attracted towards participating within the Battlefront historical collector or the historical part of Battlefront, because obviously it's my line of interest. And specifically, there are two of us who are quite active. We are pure collectors, because somebody who has a collection with 5 or 10 items, that's still great. You're still preserving that for the future. But when I talk about collectors, I mean people who've really dedicated a substantial proportion of their life and a lot of effort into putting together a meaningful collection. I mean, for example, I have an MG34 collection, which is, I wouldn't say complete, but somebody might describe it as complete. I mean, we have 2 machine guns, we have the Lafette for it, we have all of the accessories, including the chamber gauges, the armorer's kit for it, the drums that come with it, the sling, the original sling, the sling for the Lafette, the protective covers which soldiers would put on to cover the firearm when it's not in use, all of the cleaning accessories, the manuals. I think I have 20 or more manuals for the MG34, including the books, including the Butz manuals, which are quite rare in themselves. Rare accessories, things you find, very difficult to find. The optics of they're usually a group of 4 machine guns, MG34s, which were used like as an artillery battery earlier in the war. They were used for ranged fire on the Lafette. There were all the optic accessories, the binoculars, the ranging device, the angle calculation, theodolite, and the actual mechanical calculator, all of these, the pouches, the soldier pouch, the anti-aircraft sight, all of that. Putting all of that together is a huge effort. And then having it all together, that would be the mark of a real collector, somebody who wants to complete a collection. And there are few of us that have that inclination, the knowledge, the time, and the resources to do that. So we are like-minded people, and each would have their own interests. For example, I have a close friend, I have a Walter collection, but he has a very special Walter collection. And it's a pleasure always to talk to them. If you buy something, you have a doubt, you can talk to one of your colleagues. So the collector groups are very important, and in Malta we should be much more active. And you also learn tips and tricks. For example, which is the best preservative for holsters, which is the best way to store a leaflet or a manual or a book. Or something which happened in the collector scene, something was discovered which is interesting. Or a reference book which came out which would be advisable to buy. So collector groups are very important.
A lot of collectors collect things that either reflect, like you, things that people in their family used to collect, or they connect them to family members. Or they have a job, or it's somewhat related to what they collect. Maybe they work somewhere related to history or somewhere of the sort. You, on the other hand, your line of profession is in medicine, right? So one can even argue your collection is the exact opposite of your job, because your job is to literally safeguard life, and your collection is all about war, and which obviously is related with death, which you can argue against or for. It's up to you. But my question is this. Do you think there is any part of your job as a doctor which motivates you as a collector? For example, when I hear you talk, as you did right now, you mentioned like I have the MG collection you have, which is almost complete. You mentioned all the different parts. I remember myself studying biology and naming all the parts of the body, sort of. Is there any parallel to that?
I would say, first of all, let's tackle the medical part. In medicine, in my opinion, medicine is an art and a science. So if you're a pure scientist and you're a doctor, you're going to be a very cold doctor. On the other hand, if you're very empathic and very good with people, if you're not a good scientist, you're not going to be very useful to your patients. They will like you, but you won't be a very good doctor. So I think being very precise, precision is something I take to the level of obsession, and to almost an unhealthy level. But precision is very important in my job. And it's also something I apply to the collection. I'm very precise, and everything has a purpose. Everything is in its place. So even in my academic research, it was about classifications. So about studying the relationships, for example, between a diagnosis and symptoms. And one of the things you do is precise measurement, and in that you need to classify. And I'm actually in a group developing classifications for primary care. So there's very much of an overlap. Precision, science. Appropriate accuracy. So too much precision is bad. The right amount of precision, levels of measurement, all of these things come into my scientific work, come into my medical work, but also then fit into, with collection, doing things the right way, being precise, being correct, documenting everything you do, even if it's something I do in my work, researching, reading up. Again, there's an overlap between medicine and obviously collecting. But what's important for me is when I'm in the collection, I'm not thinking about other things. I'm focusing entirely on what I'm doing. So it's a way of, in a way, like not being all the time a doctor, but also going into other things, which is healthy for your mind, keeping your mind supple and flexible. Also, collecting is something you can do on your own. Medicine, you're all the time working with people. You're all the time research. No, you're going to be doing the work on your own. But when you're in medicine, you're all the time working with people, and you're dealing with the emotional aspects of life, which can lead to burnout, emotional exhaustion, eventually feeling detached from people, feeling that you're not being successful. This is what I did research. I did research on burnout in primary care. I wrote a paper about that. Research from 13 European countries. So doing something on your own, not with people, not being distracted, is also a way of, in a way, relaxing your brain or using a different part of your brain. And it's one way I find which relaxes me. During whilst I'm doing it, I'm very focused. But it's very satisfying to be able to, get into a quiet place, into the garage, and, take care of a 100-year-old object. Spend an hour taking something apart, putting it together, and you know that you fall back if something doesn't work. You can always call your son who's an engineer. That helps a lot. So yes, there's a lot of overlap, and the way I've approached collecting obviously reflects from where I come from, the precision and the accuracy and the reading up and researching in medicine. So there is much of an overlap there, really. It's about firearms kill people. That's not the way I look at it. The way I look at it is this was part of history. And in history, there was a lot of violence, there was a lot of bad things that were done. If we don't remember what happened, we will repeat the same mistakes. So, in my opinion, the solution to the huge tragedy that was Auschwitz is not to destroy Auschwitz and cover it up and bury it and there it's done, gone and done. It is to maintain it as a living memory of the history, the terrible history, so that we learn from that and we reflect on that and we don't make the same mistake. So my firearms are not going to, at least as long as they're in my collection, they're not going to be killing anyone because they're hidden away and stored. Some of them may have a very macabre history. I specifically avoid collecting anything which is related to the SS or to the concentration camps or to things which were to do with the oppression of civilians, or I don't collect anything which is to do, even uniforms, I don't collect uniforms, but I don't go into anything which is purely of a political interest, with very few exceptions. My interest is really about the conflict and about the war, so most of what I have is to do with the Wehrmacht, with the army, or with the Luftwaffe, with the Air Force, or with the British forces, or with the American forces. So it's for me, it's more important to have to look at the history. I do also have commercial firearms. I have quite a collection of commercial firearms, different firearms that were manufactured for the use of the general public, for security forces, for personal defense, etc. But my interest there is really the mechanical way they work and the way they were manufactured, and to look at the history of the firearms, principally up to the end of the Second World War. That is where my collection, with few exceptions, stops. I also have a collection of modern firearms which are, as I also have interest as a target shooter. So I also have firearms which are appropriate for target shooting. I have air pistols, I have two pistols, I have target pistols, which are again stored and properly maintained and remain functional to participate in my sports interest.
I'm glad you just mentioned that the mechanical aspect of the items. I think something that sets you apart from other collectors is that where someone might buy a firearm or an artillery shell or a grenade or something of the sort and simply leave it where it is, oil it up, preserve it, you take specific interest in how it works. You just mentioned that you disassemble it and you ask your son if something goes wrong to fix it. I share that interest. I like to look up things. I like to look at diagrams. I mean, I'm looking at you even have cutouts, see things from the inside. What is the motivation behind that?
Because I'm very interested in how things work. When I'm looking at the human body, I'm thinking all the time of the function. So what I'm seeing, how it reflects the normal or abnormal function, and what's wrong and what can be fixed. With respect to the firearms and with respect to I also have a collection of ammunition. It's interesting how these things worked, how these things actually functioned. What is their structure? What is their function? And what is their purpose? The structure, the function, the purpose, what it was used for. So all of that is interesting, and being authentic is part of it. You don't want things which don't work or where the internals have been replaced. So understanding how things work is also very important and very interesting. I mean, I've also read books, for example, about the different, for example, locking mechanisms on different firearms. For example, how an MG34 works, and how an MG34 and an MG42 are different. One is based on a system where you have a locked system which is released by gas. The other one has a partially locked system, which basically is also eventually released by the gas pressure, but it works in an entirely different way with roller locking, and was very advanced at the time. I have an MP44 which has also worked on roller locking. The manufacture of them, some of them were milled and it took a lot of work, others were metal stamped. One of the interesting pieces of my collection is a Jaeger pistol, which is from the First World War, and it was the first sheet metal pistol. So all of these things interest me a lot because they also fit in with the history, the context, and also help me understand why a particular firearm was successful, why it wasn't, and that's also part of the history. And some of it is very important. For example, the MG34, which was a very special universal machine gun, was an invention of the Germans, which allowed them to be very successful at the beginning of the Second World War, because it was a unique firearm which could be used in attack and defense, which could be used as a light machine gun, as a medium machine gun, or as a heavy machine gun. And it had one firearm which could address all of these roles. And the structure of the MG34 and the function of the MG34 helps you understand the historical context, because it was a very important firearm which allowed the Germans to be successful at the beginning of the war, because they had something which the Allies didn't. The MG44 was the first assault rifle. Understanding how it works, understanding the history behind it, and understanding how incompetent the German leadership, and specifically Adolf Hitler, was in not accepting it earlier on in the war, would probably might have turned around the war actually, but probably certainly would have delayed the war much longer because the MP44 was such an important discovery. It was actually the MP, the first assault rifle was the Walter and Mauser models, the 40. I'm getting confused on in 41. So it actually took them 3 or 4 years to actually understand the revolution, which was the assault rifle. So there was so much time lost. MKB 41 was, I think, one of the first ones which could have been adopted, but they weren't. And looking at the object, you understand the importance, you understand the application in military tactics, and you understand then the history and the context in history, and all of that is so very interesting.
Before moving on and asking different questions, I want to get at more detail about, because this is something I also wonder about myself, why. Because I have never met someone that is interested in as much as you about how things work. And even when I buy an artillery shell, even if it's empty, I look it up, I look at how it's supposed to be filled, and that's something I don't share with anyone but you as a collector. So, but to ask the same question, I'm going to think of it laterally. If I can ask you, I want to ask you, what motivated you to become a doctor? Because I think that could shed some light on why this fascination with, as you just mentioned, this how things work.
It's actually, you're actually quite right, because I'll tell you then, I didn't want to become a doctor. I wanted to become a physicist.
Okay.
It's not boasting, it's just a fact. I mean, I don't think I've ever sat for a physics exam and I didn't get 100%.
All right.
So because physics is so logical, it's like mathematics, 1 + 1 = 2. So there is so much in physics which is explained. Most of the laws, they give you a precise answer. You have a formula, you work out the formula, and you get a precise answer. But it's interesting that at the core of physics is so much uncertainty. Quantum physics is all about uncertainty.
Of course.
You can't predict the position and the speed of an electron. The more you know about the speed, the less you know about the position. The more you know about the position, the less you know about the speed, the uncertainty principle. So it's really interesting how, I'm a scientist, I'm very interested in physics. And then I went into a science which was quite uncertain. In medicine, there's so much uncertainty, and actually handling the uncertainty is both a science and an art. So how did I get from physics into medicine? Because, at one point I still remember the conversation, I wanted to be a nuclear physicist. And I probably would have been quite a good one. But then my father said, you're going to become a physicist. Where are you going to study physics? Where are you going to go on? You're going to be a physics teacher? You're going to eventually go to Europe and work on at CERN or somewhere. I mean, you want to live in Malta. So the practicality. And so I think of all the sciences, I was really good in physics. I was really good in chemistry. I was good enough in biology, but biology was not my favorite because there was too much memory work, which was not logical. With chemistry, you understand the formula, you know it. You understand physics, you understand the formula.
Sort of prediction, sort of.
Rather, you can derive other formulas. I used to study just the formulas. I was not one to spend a lot of time studying. I would study the formulas. I would remember the formulas that I needed. Then I could derive all the others from the formulas I knew. So during an exam, if I forgot a formula, I would just go back to another formula and derive it from it. For me, everything was logical, everything in its place. Chemistry, the same. Copper sulfate is copper sulfate. It is or it isn't. I mean, an atom is an atom of copper or it's an atom of iron. It's one or the other. There's nothing in between. Biology was very much more difficult, and there was so much to study, which was pure memory work, which was not good for me. I'm also dyslexic, so reading a lot of text was always giving me headaches. So biology, I had to do a lot of studying, a lot of things by memory. I still found it logical. You had the classification tree, so there was some order in it. But then medicine, obviously, there was so much uncertain, so much to remember through memory. But it was the ultimate science. I mean, in our time, what you had to choose from. If you went to physics, you were going to become a physicist. I probably could have become an engineer. Maybe my son is now becoming an engineer, so it's interesting.
Yes.
So there you are. But then medicine was very much a noble science, and I was pushed into that in some way. I had a cousin who was a doctor. There were a lot of Solers who were doctors, so I said, okay, I'll give it a try. And okay, I mean, I practically sailed through medical school. It wasn't too difficult. Except third year, there was a lot of memory work, which was a bit of a burden. And second year with anatomy was, because anatomy, again, there is function and structure, but there's all of the names of all of these nerves and muscles and all. There's a lot of memory work, and it was quite a burden for me. But I still remember much of it, and I certainly remember all that I need to remember to practice, with precision. But then I understood more about uncertainties, and it became really something very interesting. In fact, my PhD was about certainty and uncertainty, and how you define certainty and uncertainty, and how you would approach that problem from the aspect of probability. So it really went into mathematics, statistics, and so I brought back the maths and the statistics back into my medicine with my PhD. So underlying was always the precision, but also applying it in the real world and actually getting something useful from it. So the two things. And I eventually got very much to like working with people, because I'm not a people's person, but I like helping people, which is a bit of a controversy, but there it is. But then, so that's how I got into medicine. It was because that's what was available. I would either become a physics teacher or a marine biologist or a doctor, and I didn't think of engineering at the time. Maybe I should have. And eventually, at one point, I was even thinking of law and accounts, because accounts they have a lot of precision as well. But I went into medicine because it was maybe one of the most challenging to get into, and one of the most difficult courses. And challenges have always attracted me.
I think it makes a lot of sense what you're saying, and it's fitting all the puzzles I have about you, because obviously behind you is a wall of artillery shells, which obviously is full of physics. Artillery is all about physics.
Yeah.
So this is sort of your return to your love to physics, your collection.
Absolutely.
Right? That's what it is.
Yes, absolutely. And it's also about metals and about the physics, the physical properties of metals and the hardness. And I knew very little about metal hardness until I went into the military side and firearms and treating metals to achieve certain physical qualities, which then allow the structure, which then allow the function, which then fit into the context of the history. So it was really, really something I resonated with. And the more I learn, the more it becomes interesting. And also the idea of completing things, putting things together and putting things in their place is also something which resonates very much with my character. I want everything in its place. A bit too much. I'm a bit too ordered. I'm a bit too obsessional about things being in their right place. But again, everything has a certain defined structure, and which addresses a defined function, which then addresses a particular application to fit a military, in this case, need. So all of that resonates with the way I think and the way I apply even with the other sciences, including medicine.
This is something interesting. Do you think you will ever complete your collection?
No, of course not. You cannot. I mean, I know people, and I admire it. I mean, it's something I admire. For example, you have the K98K rifle, the standard German, the carbine for the German military throughout the war. So from beginning to the end, the Germans were using K98K. So each year there were different years of manufacture. Obviously, it was manufactured throughout the war. There were different factories making the Mauser K98K. It was not just Mauser, but other factories that were making mostly Mauser, but there were other factories under the Mauser wing. Certain parts were made in different other factories, for example. So you have all sorts of variations of the K98K by air, by manufacturing site, variants. You might have, for example, a change in the sights, or a change in the bayonet fitting, for example, or a change in the wood used for the stock. And that would be a different variant. And there would be people who have just K98Ks in their collection, and they want one from every manufacturer, one from every year, one with every different variant, and that is a collection you can complete. There are only so many variants, and eventually you come to a point where you've got one of them all. And then you can, in inverted commas, complete a collection. And there are people who do that, and when they eventually do, then they sell it. So the actual collection, for them, the completion is more important than the collection. With me, it's not the same. With me, I'm constantly buying things. I'm constantly buying things which fit. And the only limitation is budget and space. Because in a way, I'm more satisfied having preserved so many things properly, but things that fit. I mean, I'm certain. I mean, I might get 100 offers in a month. I might go onto eGal and see 1,000 different things for sale. This I have, this I have, this I have, but then I'm finding this I don't have, but this doesn't really fit. This really fits, and even if I don't want to spend so much, that I need to get. Yeah.
I think we've been talking a lot about your collection, but we have never actually discussed what you collect, sort of. I mean, we've talked about German
Okay, let's
stuff.
start, and I can actually look around and talk. Mela, so we can talk. Let's clear out. One of the things I actually have a collection of is modern firearms. So I have, for example, a large number of interesting modern firearms. For example, I have target pistols. I have quite a few target pistols, 22 caliber target pistols, most of which I have shot. I have 9mm target pistols. I have pistols which I use for dynamic shooting. I have Smith & Wessons, which I particularly like, a whole range of Smith & Wessons. I have revolvers, which are beautiful. I've competed abroad quite successfully. In fact, in a competition in Sicily, I had actually come second with my revolver, with the Smith & Wesson 627. So I have the modern firearms, but that is a closed box. I've bought a certain number. I have a couple of things which are interesting because they're quite unusual. I have a Wildie, for example, a 45 Magnum, which is quite unusual. It's not a common pistol by any means. So those are more or less the modern. Then I have a modern target rifle, which can shoot out to 1 kilometer or more with a special Schmidt and Bender sight. Those are the modern, and those are mainly for shooting. A target shotgun, or one for shooting clay pigeons. So those are the moderns. Then I have things which are related mainly to the Second World War by nation. So I have a Russian collection. So I have a Russian submachine gun. I have Russian pistols and revolvers. I have a Russian rifle and semi-automatic rifle. But I don't have a Russian machine gun. Then I have British. I have the British rifle, British sniper rifle. I have British pistols, revolvers for the Second World War. I then have quite an extensive. I then have let's go the smaller ones. An American Second World War collection with the Garand, the M1 carbine, the submachine gun, the Thompson, etc. The Colt pistol, American Army. Then I have a much more extensive German collection with the German machine gun, the German submachine guns, pistols and rifles, sniper rifles, semi-automatic rifles, etc. But then I also have a World War I collection, which is a bit more limited. I have American, German, and British World War I firearms, and some of them are quite special. I have one of the first British rifle, the SMLE, but the first one, the original.
So you have multiple collections.
So multiple, but then the First World War. So I have First World War Lugers, the First World War German revolver, First World War British revolver, First World War American Colt pistol, but it was actually issued for the British. Then I have a section which is mainly commercial, which is interwar. So I have all of those mainly pistols which go back from more or less 1900 to 1940s. I have the Walters, the Mausers, the Sauer and Sons, but then I also have collections which are in inverted commas commercial, because they are not military, they are not firearms for the military, but they are police firearms. So I have a collection of police firearms. I have a collection of flare pistols, and then I have the accessories. So I have the holsters, the slings, the manuals, the magazines, the magazine pouches, the accessories for the firearms, the cleaning kits, and then for the MG34 I have all of the optics, but I also have some larger pieces as well, limited. I have 3 mortars, 2 8.8 centimeter mortars and 1 5 centimeter mortar, German Second World War, with all of their accessories, including the sights, including the deco rounds, including the transportation cases. But then I have a collection of most of the important ammunition used in the heavy pieces throughout mainly the Second World War. I have some First World War pieces, including a poison gas shell from the First World War. But most of them are Second World War. And then I have Russian, American, British, and German, but mostly German, including naval cells, including German military rockets, the Nebelwerfer, the rockets, the rocket explosive and also smoke rockets, and including some big pieces. I have a 21 centimeter mortar shell, howitzer shell from German from Second World War, 17 centimeter, 15 centimeter, 1 to 8, 88, all the way down to 37 millimeter, including some rare rounds, including APCR rounds, which is armor piercing core rigid, which are the special rounds which have higher armor penetration, but they were very difficult to make because you needed special materials. For example, tungsten, which the Germans had in low supply. So I have some quite rare rounds. Mm-hmm. And then I have the cutouts. I have cutouts which actually look through the bullet or through the shell, and you actually see how it works. So all of that. And the manuals and all the literature, all of that together. And that more or less encompasses most of it. Right, work.
Before we move on to a concluding discussion on the future of your collection, I have one or two more questions. You just mentioned, obviously, that you have a wide variety of objects, all of them related to, obviously the modern ones are not related to war, but there is still firearms, but I would say 90% of your collection is about the Second World War or World War I.
Second World War, I would say, would be about 80 or 85% of the collection, yes.
So I asked this to other collectors, and I'm going to ask this to you now. When you, for example, I'm looking at something that was used in the war over there. It's a machine gun tripod, right? So I'm seeing it right now in your collection, right? That was obviously God knows where it's been. So is there an element of what is called trivialization in what we collect, something that was meant for war across Europe and soldiers died by it, and now it's in our possession? Sometimes I almost feel, I'm proud that I collect things and I preserve them, but there's also an element, okay, who am I to actually possess this?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, what I know, I mean, if there was a way to exhibit them in a way which would be practical, I would be perfectly happy to have them on permanent display for everyone to enjoy. But the problem is, first of all, there's no museum which is large enough. Secondly, not everyone is going to, I mean, okay, let's say you take that Lafette and you put it on display in a museum somewhere. 99.9% of the people that would see it would not appreciate really and truly what it is. So why am I special, and why do I, in a way, don't feel undeserving of owning an object? If I know, so first of all, if I've bought it, I didn't steal it or I didn't cheat someone to buy it. I'm quite ethical in the way I approach this. I don't bring down the value of things, you know. The seller knows what it is, I know what it is, we arrange a price and I pay that price. I'm not the one to sort of haggle or to go after people in financial difficulty and try to get them on the cheap. So I'm paying the right price. So I don't feel I'm doing anything definitely wrong. 2, I'm taking care of it. So that is very important for me. If I wasn't taking care of them, I would sell them, for sure. 3, I know what I have and I'm appreciating it for what it is. And I'm prepared to, and I actually organize exhibitions. So I'm all the time looking for reasons to actually share that material and to show it to people and who appreciate it. And explain what it is so that people understand the context. But at the end of the day, it's very few people that actually have all of these prerequisites. So who should be the one to have these objects? Should it go into an army depot? It will be put into a box, covered in cresol and forgotten, probably. If it's in a museum, it will probably be in the reserve collection. Again, put in some back room, hidden away. And if it's exhibited, most of the people that see it will appreciate its function, possibly, but will not really understand the history. I would argue, would not understand the history, appreciate the history, and especially not the value of that particular object. And if it were to be, okay, put into like a common depot where all of these objects were put and all collectors would have access to it, not every collector is interested in every part in the collection. So at the end of the day, I mean, if I really spent so much time looking for a Walter Model 6, and there are only, let's say there are 100 in the world, I have a couple of things in my collection that there are only 4 in the world, or there's only 1 in one particular case, 1 in the world. So why should I have it? First of all, it's already been documented in a book. So people know about it, so I'm not hiding it away. Secondly, I appreciate it, I take care of it, and it will be held for future generations. Eventually it will go into an auction and it will go to someone who values it, because they will have to pay the value for it, and it's not a small value. I'll give you one example of how this really fits in. In this box right here next to me, there is what has recently been discovered, a reel, a film, or 8mm, I believe it's 8mm, of the Fallschirmjäger, the parachute regiment campaign in Crete. And this has importance for Malta because Malta was not invaded by the parachute regiment, because the parachute regiment suffered such enormous losses in the invasion of Crete. And they would have been wiped out if the British had attacked them appropriately. The British didn't understand it was going to be an airborne invasion, and they almost ignored the Fallschirmjäger attack. But they did fight against the Fallschirmjäger, and the Fallschirmjäger had huge losses. And after the war, when it was a success, the invasion, the airborne invasion of Crete was definitely a success. It was an airborne invasion. They took over the airport. For 3 days, they were flying in troops. The British didn't counterattack, which was a huge error. And they ended up taking over Crete. But there were it was such a significant losses that Hitler himself congratulated the commander of the Fallschirmjäger, but then said, "You did so well, but the Fallschirmjäger will never be used for an airborne invasion ever again," which killed the plans for the invasion of Malta. Excuse me. So what happened then was that it was instead bombed, and it was become the most bombed place on earth in the Second World War. No more bombs per square meter than that did fall on Malta anywhere, not even Stalingrad. So it has important context. This documentary of the invasion of Crete by the Fallschirmjäger, it's in 8mm. It was digitized before I got it, and the digital version I know does not exist anywhere. I haven't seen any reference to this film anywhere, and I'm planning to put this out on YouTube with the help of the Battlefront group, so it's available for other people to enjoy. So yes, absolutely. Part of my work is actually even disseminating. It's also to do with medical research. When you find something, you write it up in an article and you publish, and I've done that a number of times. I'm also involved with medical journals as an editor, as a deputy editor or assistant editor. So this is also part of it, that I will actually be sharing, in this case. The film will remain in my library, in my collection, but it's been digitized, and I hope to share that so people will be able to enjoy that film for the first time, probably since the Second World War. So I'm also into the dissemination, and I feel quite proud, and I don't have any problems with having these objects in my collection, because I think I'm doing the best one can for these things.
You obviously are. I mean, you have dedicated a lot of time, energy, emotions, financially as well. It's you support it, and that's maybe something to start concluding on, which is as important as every other question I've asked you today. A collection is the product of a collector, right? So, and you are very lucky that many people don't have people in their families that are interested in what they do. Obviously, your son, Steve, is very interested, he's part of Battlefront as well, and obviously I'm sure he can appreciate just as much as you what you have, which is rare, especially in my generation and his, which is just a bit older than mine. So what is the future for your collection?
Stephen will decide. So basically the collection, sometimes I thought of, and I may eventually, it may happen, you may sort of at one point get in contact with a specialized auction house like Hermann Historica, send a significant part or even all of it over to Germany, and it will become, there will be one or more books when it's sold, because it will go into they will have a special volume, a special auction for that. And it's been done with a number of collections which are smaller than mine at this stage. Okay, although there are some items in the collection which are rare, which are very rare, and they will in themselves be of interest in a particular auction. But taken all together, they would probably prepare a special volume for that if we did that. On the other hand, so it would be satisfying to actually see one or two books, two auctions of the Soler collection. You have a Hermann Historica Soler collection auction. But on the other hand, no, I don't think that's in the plans. I think what the plans are, as long as my wife and family keep on being patient and accepting that, unless there are financial pressures, which I hope there won't be, but I don't think there will be, but there may be. You decide to sell off a significant part of it. What will happen is that Stephen will eventually decide what he's particularly interested in and what he wants to keep, and what he doesn't want to keep, and how that would be best sold. My collection is quite specialized, so probably at least the ammunition part will not be sold in Malta. I don't think there is enough interest in what I'm collecting in Malta. So that will probably have to be sold abroad or sold through electronic means and then transported abroad. The manuals, etc., I think the same. I don't think there's anyone who has that specific interest. I mean, I have, I think, 5 different variants of the Butz manual for the MG34. One of them is quite rare. There's going to be more interest abroad for these type of things. So probably eventually they will be sold abroad. But it's up to Steve. I think it'll be up to Stephen to decide eventually.
If I can ask, obviously, Steve appreciates what you have, and I'm sure he's very proud of what there is in the family. But what is the relationship of your collection with the rest of the family?
My daughter isn't interested. It's not an area of her interest at all, not even shooting itself. And my wife tolerates. So basically there is, on the wall there are the swords and the bayonets, and those are fine. She's happy with those, absolutely. So at home we have some pieces of art. Again, there's another collection there, because I have quite a number of pieces of John Martin Borch, watercolors, which I love, my wife loves. And we have that. But more or less there's not much more space. And we're not the type that would buy art and put it away in a box, so it's out there on display. There's quite a lot of stuff upstairs, which is on display, which is the cutouts. There are some munitions, the pilot helmets, the Deco sniper rifle. I have a cutout of the Lee Enfield rifle, which is upstairs as well. I have those that are older than 1900 are on display. There's a Chassepot rifle, and I have some of the literature is upstairs in part of the library, and I also have some things running around the house. I have a couple of 88 shells upstairs, so some of them are accepted. There's not a particular interest. There's a lot of respect if they know that touching them is something, I don't want them to be in any way damaged. So there's a lot of care taken with them, maybe even from other members of the family. But the interest is definitely Steve. Steve has a great deal of interest, and he has things in his own collection, and he has his own collection as well.
Of course. So you would say that your collection is accepted as long as it doesn't affect sort of the rest of the sort of.
Yeah, probably. And the house, there's quite a lot of things on display, and they are accepted and I think appreciated, because at the end of the day they haven't been removed. So there is acceptance, absolutely. But again, when we have an exhibition, other members of the family don't really come and attend. I mean, it's Steve and me mainly who will be involved.
Excellent. I think I asked you some questions that have been on my mind for many months as well, thinking about the podcast, and I think we covered a lot of things as well. Thank you very much for this talk.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. I hope we're going to keep on doing this with other collectors. Obviously, this was a very, very interesting episode, and I hope people listening enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
When my girl and I go out and join the park parade, arm in arm we stroll along, a happy man and